introduce myself in sort of the general course. So thank you, Lysander. But before I do, just want to give a quick heads up about the structure of this discussion. I'm only going to present to you for about 30 minutes or so. The rest of the time, for as much time as it takes, I'd like to be a discussion. So I will take your questions and I will respond to those questions as best I can. And I think at that point, Lysander, I think we'll be able to turn video on and so forth, and we can make it a little bit more interactive. What I'll ask then is if you have a question during the talk itself, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A section, and I will start with those when I get to the end. And I'll go back to slides as appropriate and so forth. But just that way, we can kind of keep the talk itself contained and then really focus on what I really would like to spend as much time on as possible, which is helping all of you think about these skills, answering any questions you may have, just sort of sharing my experiences as an engineer who's gone through, I don't even know how many interviews at this point. So to speak of those experiences, I'm Max Zimon. You can call me Max. That's perfectly fine. I've been a software engineer for quite a while. I mean, my first paid job as an engineer was in high school. I would design websites. That was the job that I did to earn some side money in high school. I went to Case Western Reserve University, and I have a Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science and Cognitive Science from there. I graduated from there in 2016. And not long after graduating, I moved out here to beautiful Madison, Wisconsin, where I worked for a company called Musicnotes. For those of you who haven't heard of it, Musicnotes sells digital sheet music. I tell people it's like Amazon Kindle for sheet music. And it's actually the largest website that does that. It's been in business for more than 20 years. And it's based here in Madison. Left that job at Musicnotes. That was a great position, learned a lot. But I left that job at Musicnotes and started at a company called Olo just a few months ago. At Olo, we make the middleware for restaurants. So all of the infrastructure behind menus, ordering, point of sale integrations, integrating with providers like DoorDash and Uber Eats and so forth. From the restaurant's point of view, we do all of that stuff. We do the front ends for online ordering, whether it's through the web or through apps. We do switchboard work for call centers for taking orders. Lots and lots of things. If restaurants need to do it and it's on the computer, we probably do it. The only thing we can't do ourselves is cook the food or deliver it to you, but everything in between is us. I'll talk a little more about Olo at the end. Now, there are some other companies that I've worked for that I have not put on this list. I haven't put them on this list because my experiences with them weren't great. Or maybe because I interviewed and I didn't get offered a job, or I got offered a job that I didn't take. It's a normal part of the process of interviewing. And what I want to talk about today is when you are doing a job interview, when you are engaging with a company for any kind of technology position, whether it's an internship, a full-time developer position, even a design or quality assurance or something position, how do you assess that company? And how is that company going to assess you? Apart from the technical stuff. We all know that there will be technical components to interviews, but there are many other components to doing job interviews. Those components are also really important, and they can seem kind of nebulous. So today I want to help you learn to navigate this idea of what companies often refer to as culture fit. And also helping me navigate, I have my friend Scout right here. If at any point you are not sure about what I'm saying, and you're not sure how to phrase questions, I encourage you to just look at Scout. She's right here, and she will help you out. She's always in the background watching me and judging me and making sure I'm doing a good job. Now, culture fit is a term you've probably heard before, but frankly, even if you haven't, it's kind of a nebulous term. It's a nebulous concept, and companies keep it that way on purpose because it can mean a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to, depending on what it is that companies are looking for when they're trying to hire people. And the truth is, frankly, that not every company that you would be interviewing with is necessarily a company that you want to work for. And their definition of culture fit plays a big role in that distinction. So it can be very tempting when you are starting out in the industry, when you're looking for those internships, you're looking for those first jobs. There's this feeling of, gosh, I just hope that I get something. I remember being a senior in college and thinking to myself, God, nobody's going to hire me. I don't know what I'm going to find. I better hope I get any job at all, and any job at all would make me happy. The good news, though, is that we are all in an industry where our skill sets are in very substantial demand. And the odds are really good that you won't have just one place where you can get a job. You may have many. And even if you have just one place initially, you'll have many by the time you're a couple years in, by the time you move from junior developer to regular developer, from regular developer to senior developer, or whatever other term your company uses. You will start to have options. And it's always good to think about what you want and the options that are available to you as much as you're thinking about, or maybe even more than you're thinking about, what the companies that you're going to be interviewing with want out of you. That's where this idea of culture fit comes in. It's not just about what does the company I'm interviewing with want from me. It's also about what do I want from the company. And so knowing the answer to how companies view culture fit is really important. Let's talk a little bit about some of the different ways that companies might choose to consider culture fit. Companies that, in my view, do not prioritize people in hiring the way that I feel they should will tend to define culture fit as, is this person similar enough to us? Are they like us enough that we won't have to change who we are, our culture, to fit them? Will they be similar enough to us that we won't have to do any extra work or go out of our way to behave differently because they're on our team? That's not a great definition. Similarity and homogeneity are not benefits to a company. They can seem like it because, oh, it's easier to get the person spun up. Oh, they'll like the same things we like. We'll be able to make the same kind of jokes and talk about the same kind of things and use the same kinds of technologies. That's not actually that beneficial. A company that is really looking out both for its employees and for itself is asking a very different question. They're asking a question that is more like, and it varies, but is something like, is this person that we're interviewing somebody who will add to the environment of our company in a really positive way? They might be different than us. They might be similar to us, to those of us who already work here, but they're bringing something that we want to have. If they're different, those differences are really important, not because they're reasons for us to disqualify them, but because they're actually reasons to qualify them. They're actually things that we don't have that we need. And good companies, good HR departments are always assessing that. They're thinking about, are we representing the population of customers that we have and the people who work here? Do we have a broad set of technologies? Do we have a diverse group of employees on all different kinds of metrics? Good companies, in my view, and when I say good, I mean companies that are friendly, that behave ethically, that want motivated workers, and that do not discriminate inappropriately against different categories of worker. Good companies are looking for those kinds of things. Again, doesn't mean everybody is, but in my view, good companies are, and good companies will. And when they're assessing what kind of an engineer you are, what kind of a whatever you are, they're thinking about those questions more than or as much as they're thinking about technical questions, and they're thinking about them in that way. So because the interview is two-sided, and because really, as I say, a company that is thinking about this correctly is thinking, in my view, is thinking about the interviewee as a unique individual who can contribute something important and valuable to the company, it's really important to know who you are. It's really important for you to have a great understanding of your own likes and dislikes, your own personality, your own skills and weaknesses, so that you can present those things and present them in the best possible light to the companies that you're going to interview with. Not every place that you might interview with is going to be a good fit for you. And I think it's generally a very good idea to trust yourself and your knowledge of yourself when thinking about, will this work out for me or not? Again, of course, there are times, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, where you just need something. And so maybe there are some things that you're willing to prioritize or deprioritize. And it's good to know that too. It's good to know, well, I like to work in this way or with this technology, but I'm willing to work with anything if it has these benefits or is in this location and so forth. That's all part of who you are. But knowing all these things about yourself and how you position them are really important. Once you know them, of course, getting them across can also be very challenging. Thinking about how to communicate to to a company who and what you are as a person, what kind of person you are, can be difficult, and it can feel very daunting. So what we're going to do now is talk about how to answer that question for yourself, and then how to identify situations where those parts of you can kind of shine through, the kinds of questions where you can really show interviewers who you are, while also handling some of the situations that will come up in interviewing that, to be honest, can be the scarier parts, the more challenging parts, the parts that tend to put people on guard or on edge a little bit more. What's interesting is that a lot of those situations tend to be the situations that are most interesting for you as a candidate, not just for the company evaluating you, but for you as a candidate, because they will give you a lot of insight into the kind of things you care about and into who the people are who are asking you the questions. The first thing I want to give as a piece of general advice for everybody here: it is natural and very common to be nervous, to feel a little uncomfortable in a technology interview. Not uncomfortable in the sense of someone is making you uncomfortable, as in they're saying things that are inappropriate, but uncomfortable in the sense of it feels like a high stakes environment. It feels like an environment where there's good reason to be stressed out because this is important and this could be your new job. That's totally reasonable and normal. And most interviewers, 90 to 95% of interviewers, they know that, they expect that. They're not going to take you being nervous or seeming really nervous as necessarily a sign that there's anything wrong or inadequate about you, because we've all been there. We've all been through that. And it is nerve-wracking, absolutely, to do job interviews, especially long job interviews or interviews over the course of a day, or technical interviews. It's totally normal to feel that way. And what matters is how you present that to the interviewer. What matters is how you respond to that anxiety, not that you feel anxious. It's okay to feel anxious. What matters is when you think about the questions that you get asked, and we'll go through some very specific strategies in a moment, that you focus on ways, whatever those ways are for you, to lower your own anxiety level, to keep yourself feeling like you can and will rise to and respond to what's being asked of you. And as a corollary to that, it's really important to note, most of the time, all of this stuff is rule of thumb, all of this stuff is 90% of the time, but most of the time, interviews and interviewers are not trying to trick you. They're not trying to trip you up. You're there on the presumption that you're probably good enough to have this job, or you wouldn't have made it past the screening of your resume. They're assuming and they want you to succeed. I mean, goodness knows, in my company, we need engineers. We want everybody we interview to succeed. We want everybody that we interview to get hired if we possibly can. We're not looking for reasons to fail anybody out. We're looking for reasons to say you are good enough and we want you. So there's no secrets. There's no special codes or keys that will let you survive the interview or win at the interview. There's just communication. There's just knowing yourself, knowing the interviewer, and answering all the questions you can to the best of your ability. And with that in mind, I mean, a great way to sort of sum that up is interviews are a professional environment. Good interviews are two professionals communicating with each other about things that they both have in common, things they both want and need, and figuring out whether there might be a match between those two groups of people's skill sets, between yours and the company, your skill set and the company's need. Thinking about yourself that way, thinking about yourself as somebody who is good enough, who is capable of being this professional person, whatever that may mean, who is able to solve the problems you're being presented with, even if they seem challenging at first. That takes active practice. It's not something that comes naturally. You won't be able to do it 100% of the time, but it's very, very important. If there's one thing I would encourage you to practice, if you do mock interviews, if you do question and answers with friends, or practice these skills, it's practice thinking of yourself as somebody who fundamentally is supposed to be there and is good enough to be there, because that's the key. That's what's going to define all these little different kinds of questions that I'm going to get into in a second. The big difference between the ways to try to answer the questions and the ways and the things to try to avoid have to do with what those ways of behaving suggest about how you view yourself and how you view your own capabilities, and therefore how the company should view you. Because interviewers can't read your mind. They don't know what's happening in your head. All they know is what you show them. All I know if I'm interviewing a candidate, which I've done many times, is what the candidate tells me. And again, I'm not looking for how nervous are they. I'm looking for how they think about my responses and or my questions and how they answer them. That is really, really important. The last thing I will mention is keeping in mind your goals is very, very important. Again, sometimes people just need whatever job they can get, and that's fine. Sometimes people have very specific expectations. A lot of the time it's somewhere in the middle. Knowing what it is that you want and focusing on whether this company can bring you that thing is a really good way to keep yourself centered in an interview. Think about your goals and needs and how by helping this company, by providing value to them, you can fulfill your needs, rather than thinking about whether the company is assessing you or how well you're doing on their assessment of you. That will actually help you on the company's assessment of you, because that's in many ways what working a job is. You're providing a service to this entity, this company, in exchange for some kind of compensation. So being focused on, I know what I'm looking for, and I know what I can give you in exchange, is a good way to keep yourself attending to what the company is interested in knowing about you. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about a few of the specific kinds of questions that you'll get in interviews, and you will get these, that there are some maybe better and less good ways to approach. These are what we call the soft skills questions. I will preface this section by telling you, you will get questions like this. It's going to happen. Every technology company that interviews worth its salt is going to ask questions that fall into some of these categories, because, as I mentioned before, the way people respond to them, more even than the content of the question, tells you a lot of information about them that you really want to know. Let's talk about questions you don't know how to answer. You're going to get questions about technologies you're not familiar with or maybe only know the names of. You're going to get questions about kinds of work, for example, scaling such and such a service, working in such and such a database, doing such and such testing that you won't have done before. It will happen, and it's okay. It's always a good idea to know about the company that you're working with, to maybe go online and see what kinds of technologies they like to use and understand how they think about tech and what their stack is and what they expect of their developers or whatever role you're applying for. It's a great idea, and it's important to know the job description. But even knowing the job description, even knowing, oh, maybe this company uses React and I only know Angular, you're going to get questions you don't know the answers to. When that happens, it's really important to remember, as I was saying before, that you are capable of answering those questions given time and appropriate resources. If you're in this stage of the interview process, you're fundamentally good enough. So fundamentally, if you're given time and energy, you can find the answers to questions you don't know the answers to. I am very confident that that is true of engineers, probably of all of you, who are working hard at being engineers and who care about the work that they do. You will figure it out given time, given maybe the ability to use Google, as we all do, because half the time when someone asks me to do something I don't know, I'm just Googling it. That's what we're all doing. Given that, I would recommend avoiding any kind of a defensive response. I would avoid any kind of a response that closes you up, that says, that puts up a boundary of, well, I don't know how to do that, to the interviewer, because they will get the sense that will imply that you're not willing to try to learn new things. At the same time, I would be very careful. It might be very tempting, rather than to be defensive, to redirect to something that you do know. Well, I don't know about React, but I do know about Angular. It's a great idea to mention, that you know these other things that are similar and talk about those experiences. Absolutely, you can mention those skills and identify them. But I would always come back to the fundamental question that was asked and be clear about what you do and don't know about the thing that was asked and how you think you can learn it. The last thing is that I would never, ever mislead. Do not act like you know what you're talking about when you really aren't sure. Do not fuzz the answer, try to sort of mush by on concepts where you're sort of half familiar with them, but present it like you know the full answer. I would not do that. the interviewers will be able to tell, because you should assume that the person you're talking to knows knows the thing probably better than you do if you're not aware of it. And we'll be aware that you're kind of fuzzing the content a little bit. Instead, literally say, I don't know. That's totally okay. Very few people are going to judge you if you say, I'm not really familiar with that. I don't think I've worked with it before. Or say, I have some familiarity, but I'm not an expert. If I say, well, this is what I know about React. This is how I've been exposed to it. And I'd love to work with it more. I'm sure that I can learn how to do it to do all of these other things. That's a great answer. That's as good as you're going to get when you really don't know the answer, which is, I don't know, but I will figure it out. And if you want to talk it through with me, I will learn about it. I encourage engaging in a conversation with your interviewer, which is to say, really, ask them, well, hey, I haven't used React, but is this something that you guys use a lot? How do you use it? If you folks are using it, in what way do you use it? And, what are you looking for? And then that will help you match up with some other things that you know about. You say, oh, well, I haven't done I haven't used React for that, but I've used Angular for it, and I'm sure I could figure it out in React. That's a great way to do it. Keep it conversational, keep it focused on what you are able to bring and your ability to quickly learn and understand things. Don't worry about not actually knowing the answer, because you can figure it out. Questions with no answer. There are these infamous sort of faux interview questions, the gotchas, where they'll say things like, if you were going to redesign all the manhole covers for a city, how would you do that? I've only gotten questions like that a couple of times in interviews. The things that interviewers do now tend to be more concrete. I think those are falling out of favor, but you'll also get questions that are very sort of open-ended. Suppose you want to design a system to email 1,000 people at once. How would you design that system? That's a question I got in an interview once. Suppose that I come to you and I say, I need an app that does X, Y, and Z. How would you start walking me through the process of devising such an app? That's a question I've gotten. These questions don't have a specific exact right answer that you can find or pull from your memory. They're questions where the point really is to see how you think about questions. You've probably heard advice like this before, but the absolute best thing you can do when you're given a question where there's not an obvious answer is think about what's being asked and ask some thoughtful follow-ups. And again, make it a conversation. Make it a discussion between two people who are, relative experts in this subject matter, because you're both engineers working at a high technical level, who are trying to solve this problem together, rather than a question that you are being put on the spot and forced to figure out, even though I realize that initially it may feel that way. And even though different interviewers will have different levels of willingness to sort of engage in conversation with you, treating it conversationally is often a really good tactic, because it will give you some time to think about what's happening, and it will also give you a chance to ask lots of really good follow-ups. So when I get presented with questions like this, I don't answer right away. I don't even necessarily say anything. Different people have different communication styles. I'm a very talkative person, so I'm really good at thinking out loud. You may not be. You may be somebody who needs to think through things and organize your thoughts a little bit before you think out loud, and then translate them out to the interviewer. That's totally okay. Taking a few moments, even if you're just being quiet, even if you say, let me think about that for a second, and then you do, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And in fact, you'll probably get points for it, especially if the next thing you do is ask careful follow-up questions, well thought out follow-up questions. Interviewers in my experience, place a lot of value on being able to have these conversations where there are these really good follow-ups and back and forths. When you're asking these follow-up questions, you don't want to kind of try to bypass or get around the problem. It might be true that you might say, well, in reality, I probably wouldn't do X, Y, or Z, or, oh, I would never design an app for someone in that way. It might be tempting to say that. That might even be true. And you could say, in a real world situation, I'd probably do such and such a thing that we won't do here because this is an interview. That's okay. But bypassing the problem can feel to an interviewer like you're giving up or throwing your hands up. And that's something that you never really want to create the impression that you're doing. You never really want to create the impression that this is too complicated for you and you're done with it. Even if that's how you're feeling, like sometimes it's just like, oh my gosh, why do I have to answer this? There's so many layers to this, and it's a lot to pull apart, and it's annoying and frustrating. but that's okay. That means that it's a cue that you should take a second to think about it, start to break it down. That kind of decomposition is an important skill in our field of work. And it's a skill that you have probably developed over the work that you've been doing or will continue to develop. So asking those follow-ups, thinking out loud through the different parts of the situation before you write any code, before you come up with anything concrete or draw anything, those are good ideas. Taking notes, also a very good idea. Asking for hints is a great idea. Making it the conversation, saying, well, I was thinking that I might do such and such, but I see that one could also do it in such and such a way. What do you think is best? That's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. You may or may not get an answer, but sometimes you will, and that will be helpful. So in sum, I strongly recommend don't take questions with no answer as being tricks or traps or things where some kind of immediate and perfect answer is expected. Just take them as signs that the interviewer wants to have a conversation with you and wants to learn how you think about problems. Now, I would like to be able to tell you that you're never going to have a situation where somebody asks you something inappropriate or behaves inappropriately towards you in an interview. I'd like to be able to tell you that you're never going to be asked to sign an NDA that is too broad, or that people will never ask questions that are discriminatory. Unfortunately, I can't tell you that. I can tell you that it very well could happen. I think, I see that there's about 24 people here. I think the odds that it happens to at least some of you in at least some jobs, unfortunately, are probably not that low. It probably does happen. Now, I'm not an attorney, can't give you legal advice, and I'm also not HR, so I can't give you HR advice really, except to the extent that this talk is about HR-related topics. But what I can tell you is that there are some things that you should be very aware. It's not actually legal in the United States to ask you about. Asking you about membership in a protected group, things like age, disability, sex, gender identity, your race, your religion, your marital status, these things are not things that it's legal to ask about. It's not even really legal to ask somebody if they're a citizen of the US unless and until you're at the point where you've already made an offer and you're making sure that the company is legally hiring people. Likewise with age, yes, you need to be 18 plus to do this kind of work in most states. Figuring that out is not usually something that just any interviewer can do during the interview process. That's something that comes later during the paperwork. It's also often not legal to ask employees of other companies directly for their current salary. Normally that question will be phrased in the more acceptable way, which is, what are your salary expectations? Asking about salaries from previous jobs is also allowed, although you should always feel free to use the techniques we're about to talk about to not answer questions about salary if you prefer not to. Personally, I very rarely give salary numbers. Instead, I simply say, oh, I'm looking for something in the range of, or I'm looking for something commensurate with experience. But there are various different tactics you can take with that. If you get questions like this that are not appropriate, most of the time it's probably going to be coming from an interviewer who is more junior, who is not an HR professional, who doesn't understand that these are not appropriate questions. Some of the time, hopefully not often, in the event that you get asked a question like this, hopefully it is not somebody with power at the organization or who should know better, an HR person or a higher level person. But if this happens, remember, in a professional interviewing environment, the whole conversation is voluntary. You are not obligated to give an answer to any question that you're asked, and you're not obligated to answer questions like, especially like this, in any particular way. And to say politely that a question is not appropriate, to establish a boundary, which is, I appreciate your interest, but that's not really something that I'm here to talk about. I'm really here to talk about work that I could do for your company and not about my marital status or my religion or whatever else it is. That is perfectly okay. Oftentimes the questions will be framed innocently, like, oh, you're from such and such a place. I'm also from such and such a place. You go to such and such church or synagogue or mosque. I also go there, or something like that. It'll feel, it'll seem very innocent and appropriate. If it makes you uncomfortable though, with this kind of thing, not in the, learning technical stuff and it's hard uncomfortable, but in the, this is way too personal or inappropriate uncomfortable, it is okay. And in fact, it's a good thing to establish those boundaries. Now, if you choose not to, if you're like, what, I need this job, I'm just going to give as basic an answer I can give and hope we can move on. I don't judge you. you do what you feel comfortable with and what you feel you need to do. But personally, I would strongly recommend that you not answer questions about membership in protected groups, about things that are not legal to ask. And that if the person who's interviewing you is not an HR person, you tell this to your recruiter, to your HR person when it's possible. And remember, if you need to end the interview, it's okay to do so. It's not the best thing in the world if it has to happen, but it sometimes does. And it's always okay to walk away. There are so many companies who want the kinds of skills that you all have. There are other companies. It is okay to say no. This leads me to, I think, kind of the core of this whole talk, really, and we're kind of bringing it in at the end to bring it back around. The other side of culture fit is, what do you want? How would you feel working at this company? How would you feel working with the people who are interviewing you? Will you have the opportunity to do the things you want at this company, to grow at this company? Do you feel comfortable with the way this company has been treating you in the interview process and the way you think they'll treat you if you were an employee? If you're going to make compromises about your priorities, if a company is going to pay you really well, but maybe expect you to work more than you would like, if a company is going to pay you less, but not make you work as much, if a company is going to have you use a technology that you'd rather not use, but that might be good to use or good to learn, are you okay with that? How okay with it are you? The biggest mistakes that I've made as an interviewee have been not correctly understanding my own priorities. I took a job with a company that will remain nameless here in Wisconsin before I got my job with Musicnotes. It paid extremely well. The benefits were great. It was a prestigious organization. I thought I would be able to overlook the fact that I knew I didn't like the work environment, which I was too introverted for me, that I knew I didn't like the technology, which was older and less interesting than I wanted, that I knew I wasn't going to like the training and the way that people behaved. I knew I wasn't going to like that stuff. I ignored that and kept going anyway and accepted a job. And in the end, I ended up leaving that job for a job that paid less, but had a better culture, a better environment. I've never regretted making that decision to leave. I've never regretted making the decision, which I was privileged to be able to do, to take the lower salary. Now, not everybody can do that. That's an opportunity, a privilege that I had. But if you have those opportunities, or if you think you might, it's always good to keep those priorities in mind. And even if not for this job, then for the next one. When it's time to walk away from a job, when it's time to say, you know what, this isn't for me, all you really need to do is say that politely. Keep the door open. Say, hey, it was good to talk with you, interviewer X, recruiter Y, but I don't think this is the right opportunity for me right now. Or I've been made another offer that I feel is better, or I'd like to stay with my current employer because such and such a reason. You don't even really need to give a reason as long as you're polite. The only thing I would recommend is, if you're in the position of having to tell somebody no, try to tell them no in person if you can. Try to not leave people hanging. Now, how can you find out whether the culture at a company is a culture that you'd like? This is a challenge. Companies that have not great cultures tend to be aware of that, and they can try to hide it from you in interviews. But there are questions that you can ask that will help you. Asking questions like, how do you feel about the work that you've done here? What are you proud of in the work that you've done here? How do you interact with your colleagues? Are you satisfied with those interactions? Those are all valid questions. Questions like, what do you think this company could do differently or better? What would you like to bring from other places you've worked to this place? That's a favorite that I like to ask. Totally legitimate. Some companies have policies or ways of hiring or practices about employees that you might want to know about. So for example, some people have very strong opinions for or against DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Asking, how does your company support diversity, equity, inclusion? What do you do? What are some concrete things that you do for your employees on that level? We'll give you that information. I can tell you, for example, that Olo will have a really good answer to that question. And other companies I've worked for in the past, maybe not so much, because Olo has invested in those things. Olo has employees whose whole job is to try to do that. Olo has set goals that other companies haven't set. I'm not saying that to shill for Olo, although I kind of am shilling for them a little bit. I do like them. But I'm saying it to suggest that a company where that's important will have a good answer for you. Some companies have policies around things like talking about politics or religion at work. Asking, what is that policy? Is it written down? Is a great way to learn how that company views those kinds of policies. You may have heard recently about this kerfluffle with Basecamp, where about a third of the company quit because the owners decided to change the policy for political and religious discussion at work. And knowing that companies have rules written down about things like that, whatever they might be, and knowing what those are, it's totally valid to ask, and it's totally valid to say, you know what, this answer is not what I'm looking for. I'm not here to judge what you are or aren't looking for. I'm just here to say, asking questions that will help you make those judgments is good. Asking, is there anything else you'd like to know about me, or is there anything else I should know about you, is always great. One thing I love to do in interviews, well, two things I love to do in interviews. One thing I love to do in interviews is I love to ask at the end, is there anything else you wish you could have asked me or that you didn't get a chance to ask? Because it doesn't always yield answers, but when it has, it's been really valuable. The other thing I love to do is when I have a project or something that I'm very proud of, if it is germane to what we're talking about, I'll offer to show it to people. That's not really relevant to culture fit. That's just something I've done in multiple interviews that I think has led fairly directly to offers, because they were impressed with the work that I had done that I could show them. And this was work, of course, that I'd done in my own time that didn't belong to some other company. So that's just something to keep in mind in terms of techniques for making yourself stand out. That's really a little bit to the side of this talk, but I always like to mention it. And I'm happy to get into more sort of how can you make yourself stand out? What are some good, ways to present work that you've done in the past and so forth in the question and answer section. But really my core focus here is think about what you want. Think about your priorities. Make your compromises with full awareness that those compromises are ones you're making. And know that there are other jobs and other companies, and you are fortunate to be in an industry that really needs you and where you are able to find a good fit if you're looking for it. So with that in mind, would absolutely love to hear any questions, comments, and so forth. Anything else you'd like to know about, things from my experience or things more generally related to the subject of the talk or hiring in general. I'll ask, I don't know, Lysander, if we can open it up to video and so forth, or if people are just going to put their questions in the Q&A section, but either way is totally fine with me.
Yeah,
I'll mention, while people are thinking about questions, my email address is right there. That is my work email address. You're welcome to email me there. I'm always happy to talk with anybody who has questions about these things. And Olo, by the way, we're hiring, olo.com / careers, I think, but you can find it on the main URL. We are hiring very actively. We are hiring across the range of experience from interns to senior and beyond. We do not currently have postings for internships on the website. However, if you email me, I can connect you with our technical recruiters. We do interns, generally speaking, in the summer and then possibly also in the fall, I think starting next year. So if you email me and you're looking for an internship, I will get you connected with our technical recruiter, and she can make sure, my camera's having trouble with focus, but she can make sure that you are on the list to be gotten in touch with when the time comes. And I will just say, for me personally, Olo's been a fantastic experience so far. I think it's a company that really cares about its employees. I definitely can recommend it. But that's all I'll say about that. I won't spend too much more time shilling for my current employer. Now, with regards to questions, I see a question from Darren's. What are common mistakes that you see new grads make in interviews? What are common questions experienced interviews ask that new grads don't? So when you say experienced interviews, I assume you mean experienced interviewees. If that's not correct, then just send another question and I'll adjust. Common mistakes that new grads make versus more experienced people. I think it really comes down to kind of the thrust of this talk, which is new grads tend to be very concerned about working at a company that will pay them the most or be the most prestigious, instead of at a company that will make them happiest and most suit their needs. That's kind of the number one thing, is that they won't tend to ask questions about what kind of technologies do you work with? What do you like to do? What does this company do in such and such situations? They don't think about not just, what can I do to get this job, but also, is this a job I would want? That's really important. I would say that that's kind of the single biggest That's the single biggest mistake that I see getting made. I'm just going to turn my video off and on in the hopes that I will be able to fix whatever is happening here with the focus. I think that's better. So questions that, oh, I see somebody asking, could you repeat what questions are good to ask when the floor is, oh, I'll come back to that. Sorry, I misread that. What common questions experienced interviewees ask that new grads don't? I found that more experienced interviewees will also focus less on specific technical problems and more on general scope problems, things like how do you scale? How do you anticipate the company growing and what are your plans for that? How do you think about security? More open-ended questions, I think, actually increase rather than decrease as you go up the hierarchy. That's been my experience. Now, I thought that I guess I can't click answer question live on this, so I'll just put like that and answer it that way. Robinson asks, could you repeat what questions are good to ask when they open the floor to you for questions? When they, I assume by they you mean the interviewer, really anything that you want to know is fair game. There's no like right set of questions, but some ones I really like that I strongly recommend are, if you could change one thing about this company, what would you change? I would ask things like, how do you feel people work with each other here? Have you ever felt uncomfortable in a meeting or in a working environment at this company? And how did you resolve that? I would ask questions like, what proportion of the time do you feel is spent on writing code versus writing tests versus other responsibilities? All of those are really valuable. But fundamentally, I have a suspicion that, when you go through this process for yourself, there will be things that you'll wonder in the back of your head. And the trick is finding a way to ask those questions that doesn't make you seem like a jerk. I've definitely been in interviews where I was thinking, well, if they're doing this and this, how could it be that they're scaling properly? If they're using such and such a technology, how could it be that this works without causing XY problem? It's good to ask those questions. The only limitation is, can you phrase it in a way that is appropriate and that keeps that professional context? Kareem asks, have you interviewed at a company and had the experience be very different than what you expected? If so, how did you move forward? Yes, absolutely. I've had a couple of interesting things happen, even just recently when I was looking for a new job. I interviewed with a company called Theorem, which is a consulting company, and I do recommend them. They're theorem.co if they're of interest to people, but they made a job offer that I didn't ultimately take. I didn't take it because I was more interested in working at Olo, which is not to say that I don't think they're a good place to work. And they had a process that they described pretty clearly, involved a 2-day sort of consulting arrangement where they would pay you, I think it was $500 a day, and you would work for them for a total of 16 hours. And they actually, in my case, they ended up skipping that and going right to the offer. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I thought maybe it was a manipulation tactic, but in retrospect, I don't think it was. That was unusual, but really good. Things like that do happen. That's not a humble brag. It's just, if you make an impression, people remember that impression and they'll go with their judgment on that sort of thing. I've also had situations that went the other way, though. For example, I interviewed with Google right out of school, and they got me to the very last round of interviews and then said that they felt I was, quote, borderline, and they didn't want me to keep interviewing. And they wouldn't really explain what that meant. And that was really disappointing. In all of these cases, in terms of how you move forward when you get curveballs like that, I suppose I've also had curveballs where the tone of the interview was more relaxed, more casual, or maybe more intense than I was expecting. The thing to do is kind of come back to that center of, what am I looking for? What do I care about? What can I do from here? So if the company's not going to interview with you anymore, okay, there's not much you can do about that except say, hey, would you consider me again in the future? And you can often ask that, and the answer is usually yes. If the issue is kind of the interview had a very different tone or tenor than you were expecting, you can say even to the person interviewing you, hey, what are your expectations about this interview? What is it that you're looking to know from me? You can back up and say, I just want to clarify. That's totally okay. Or you can even ask the recruiter afterwards, what were you really looking for there? I always recommend asking that question first, just to be sure. If you get good news, we're putting you further in the process than we meant to, or we're going to go right to making you an offer, that's great, but don't be overwhelmed. I would never, for example, accept an offer in the call where the offer was made to me. I would always say, give me a few days to think about it, even if I know in my head that the answer is yes. Because giving yourself some time to A, celebrate that you're getting that, which is great, and B, think about whether it's really what you're looking for, very important. Always slow down, come back to the things that are fundamentally most important to you and to the company, and make sure you understand them. That's my general guidance. I hope that answers your question. Luke asks, is it a bonus to always ask a return question at the end of an interview? I wouldn't even call it a bonus. I would say it's absolutely necessary. I would really recommend it. It's okay to not have a ton of questions. It's okay, especially if you're in the 6th or 7th interview of the day, which will happen, or your 7th interview with this company, because some companies have very long processes. Be like, I've kind of heard a lot about this company already. I don't know that I need that much more. But asking 1 or 2 things, even if they're just polite questions for the interviewer, makes you feel personable and thoughtful. And so I recommend it, especially if those questions make the interviewer think. You'll never get too many answers to things like, what would you like to change about this company? Or to, what's your favorite or least favorite part of working here? You can only gather more information. So it's always to your benefit to ask questions in every way. And I would always recommend that if possible. Anonymous asks, is there a specific interview that you still remember? If so, what was it about their interview that stood out to you? That's a great question. That's not a delay tactic. I just really needed some water. That's a really good question. And there are a few from both sides. First, I'll tell you about an interview that I was participating in as the interviewer. I remember that we had 2 interviewees for this position. It was an internal applications position where the person would be responsible for a lot of internal customers' needs, working on some pretty old and complicated stuff. We had 2 candidates, and I remember that one, when we asked him, what do you do when there's a problem? What do you do when somebody else in the company, your colleague, comes to you and says, there's an issue with the code that you've been working on. There's an issue with this thing that you finished. We need you to pull it back or make some adjustments. One of them said, oh, that wouldn't happen because I don't make mistakes like that. I believe in quality. And so when I put something out, it is high quality and it's good. I make sure it's good before I let it go. Now, the other applicant said, well, I would take that very seriously. I would want them to show me what's happening. I would want to fully understand it. And then I would try to work with them as best I could to resolve it. I take it personally. It's important to me that every user who's using my software feel comfortable and satisfied with what they're doing. And so if I fixed something in a way that didn't actually solve their problem or made another problem, I want to hear that from them, even if maybe that's not ultimately what the answer is. That's the person we hired. We hired her because it was clear that her priorities were right, not about defending herself, not about defending the quality of her own work, but rather focusing on how she could help the people whose job it was to help. We hired her, and I think there's a very good chance that that was the right decision, just thinking about how that all ended up. But that's a really great example. Interviews from a perspective where I was on the other side of things, yeah, I've had a couple from my most recent experience. There was one interview at Olo where I asked the interviewer, what made him feel comfortable working in a full remote environment, because Olo was full remote. And he talked about these concepts related to psychological safety that I thought were really valuable. And that came up a couple of different times over subsequent interviews. And that made me think, wow, this is a company that really cares about its employees. This is a company that treats its employees like people who have value because it wants them to feel safe and comfortable and respected at work. And I really appreciate that he would address that explicitly. I also remember that there was one company where there were some really negative Glassdoor reviews related to the conduct of its CEO. Not Olo, not a company I've mentioned, but there were some really negative reviews. And I challenged the manager I was talking with, to answer some of those questions. Now, I did so politely. I said, hey, I read some of this stuff and it was really disturbing. But I will say I really respect how well and how thoroughly he answered those questions. He did not dodge. He did not deny it. He did not say that's preposterous. He did not get upset. He said, yes, those reviews were talking about things that were a problem. Our owner behaved in ways that were not appropriate in terms of being rude or aggressive with colleagues. He has changed his behavior. We have limited the scope of what he's allowed to do as a result of that. And we do not endorse that kind of behavior here, and it doesn't happen anymore. And if it ever did happen, I would step in between you and him, and I would not allow that to happen to you. And I really respected that he was willing to make that so clear and that he was willing to be so honest about that. That actually was a really good sign, I thought, because people do bad things and make mistakes, but if they change and they acknowledge those things, they tend not to make those mistakes again, if they acknowledge them and fully accept responsibility for them, which is a big if. So I really respected that. I didn't end up taking the job there, but it was not because of that conversation. It was because I had other offers that were really, really impressive and that I wanted to take. What are the hardest, May asks, what are the hardest interview questions in common interviews to answer? Oh, that's very subjective. I think that'll vary for all of you. It'll really depend on, it'll really depend on your personal experience. For me, just speaking very personally, the hardest questions are ones where it feels like there's a right answer that I just don't know. The open-ended questions I can kind of live in that space. But so for example, I recently had a question, somebody asked me, which HTTP verb would you use to do such and such a thing? And I just totally blanked. And I was like, you know what? I don't know. I'm sure there is one, but I don't remember what it is. And that's what I said. I said, hey, I do this stuff all the time, but I'm just blanking right now on which one is the right one. And what I said was, in that situation, if I was working on this and I couldn't remember, I'd look it up. I would Google it. And if it's okay with you, I'll Google it right now, and then I'll look at the answers and tell you which one I think is right. And that's actually what we did. And that worked out okay. But, that's always tough, because sometimes you'll get those questions like, oh, crap, I really don't know the answer. It's really important not to freeze up. That's something that I've struggled with personally, but I think it'll be different for you. I'll be very interested in, I don't know if there's a way to do this, but if we could do a retrospective in a year or two, I'd love to hear what you found to be the hardest in your own experiences. Owen asks, would you say for entry-level jobs, they ask more technical questions rather than canonical ones? I'm not sure what you mean by canonical, but in terms of, are there more technical questions rather than sort of broader spectrum or sort of what would you do in this situation questions? No, I don't think so. At least in my experience, it tends to be pretty balanced. In my experience, if anything, a more junior person will be asked fewer technical questions because there's not as much of an expectation that you're going to know all the answers. That's not universal, though. That's not 100% true. So don't take that as the way it is necessarily. That's just my personal experience. I will say that personally, when I interview, a more junior person not knowing a technical answer bothers me a lot less. The negative experiences I've had with more junior candidates and technical questions were when they tried to sort of fool themselves into having the answer by kind of going in circles. And they weren't able ultimately to do that, rather than saying, hey, I feel like I'm getting a little bit mixed up here. Could you give me a pointer in the right direction? Which I absolutely would have done if they had given me the opportunity to do so. Darren asks, another question, is it bad to say what your long-term goals are if it's different than the role you're applying for, such as getting programming experience before becoming a manager? No, absolutely not. If a company took that negatively, that you had ambitions or bigger goals, I would judge that company negatively. I would take that as a sign that they're not interested in investing in you and supporting you. I think that most companies, when they ask you for those long-term goals, they want to know that you care about advancing in the company. They want to know that you are interested in doing better and better in your role and in growing. So no, never bad to do that. The only exception is if your plan is to work in software for a few years, save up a bunch of money, and then quit and be a writer or go to law school or something, or do something else with your existence. That's not a bad answer. Like, nobody's going to judge you negatively for that, unless what you're saying is, yeah, I'm going to work for you for a year and then throw you to the curb. But I'm sure you won't present it that way. That can be a little bit trickier. But even that is not necessarily a bad thing to be honest about if you think that the interviewer will be interested in what it is that you'd also like to do. But in general, the answer is no. It's always good to talk about ambitions and ways you'd like to grow and ask the company specifically, how could I grow towards these goals if I worked for you? Anonymous asks, how should I prepare for technical interviews? How much time do you have? That's a big question. Some general things to keep in mind, though. Technical interviews are very, very different depending on the company you're interviewing with. Not everybody has the same meaning when they say technical interview. Google means, okay, we're going to write some code in a Word document, and you're going to regurgitate algorithms knowledge that you learned in your junior year computer science class, or that if you didn't go to college, you better have learned at some point. Companies like Musicnotes, for example, and Olo does this too, say, we're going to give you a little bit of a scenario, and we're going to have some work we'd like you to do with this little dummy project, or we're going to ask you to solve a problem that we had to solve ourselves, and we'd like to see how you do it. There are different ways of preparing for those different kinds of interviews. Some other technical, there's also a category of technical interview where it's more sort of question and answer. So like, have you worked with this thing? How would you respond if you had to do this thing? For example, I've gotten questions about, if you observe that all of a sudden you're getting 10 times the web traffic than you were before, what would be your first move in response in order to try and scale your application, stuff like that. So those three categories, the like very specific algorithms or technical knowledge questions, the here's a project and try to do the project questions, and have you had experience with this, how would you approach it questions, they have different skill sets in order to answer them. Also, I do see people raising their hands. If you do the raise your hand thing, I will get to you through that way as well. So for the first category, I would say, yes, you can absolutely study that stuff up. There are GitHub repos filled with practices, ways you can practice and things you can study to ace the FANG interviews, the Google or Facebook style interviews that are just really technical. Personally, I hate those kinds of interviews, and I don't interview with companies who do that. But you absolutely can. That is a game that you can succeed at just by practicing and learning. The concepts tend not to actually be that hard. It's just that it's stuff you probably don't think about that often. And they want to see if you remember it, to be honest. I don't like those kinds of questions. I don't ask them in interviews because I don't think they're useful. The second kind, the projects, those are a place where you can really shine. I would really treat that as, okay, this is my job. I'm going to do my job on this body of work, this project I'm being asked to work on. Ask lots of questions, fully feel out the space, look at the code and talk through what you're doing. If you need to pause, as I say, and take some time to talk, that's great. Give suggestions for how even the project itself might be improved. Think about technologies that you might use. Think about how you might adjust the way that things are being done. Answer all the questions thoroughly, and then if you have time, even discuss the overall solution and whether you think it's a good fit. Really get in there and explore that space is my recommendation for that. That's a great opportunity to really show your stuff and treat it like a conversation. Don't be afraid to ask if you can look things up if there's something you don't remember. I know in my Musicnotes interview, I think I forgot that in JavaScript, there's like a specific command, it's console.write or something like that for like writing stuff out to the console. I forgot what that was called and I looked it up. Totally okay to do most of the time. And then for the last category, that's a tricky one because that's really relying on kind of innate knowledge, and that'll become something that you are going to get more as you become more senior. For innate knowledge questions like that, it's hard to prepare other than sort of having a general background that means you know how to answer. I would say if you're not sure, be honest about not being sure. And again, always try to make it a conversation. And it's always fine to simply fully ask your recruiter or whoever is leading you through this process, hey, what can I expect in this interview? What kind of questions are you going to ask? What should I prepare? Should I prepare anything? Always ask that question. If they're a good recruiter, they're not trying to mess you up. I know our recruiters at Olo, one of whom helped me prepare for this talk, she would never do that. She's not trying to mess you up. She wants you to succeed. She will tell you exactly what to expect. She probably won't tell you the exact questions, but she'll tell you this type of questions and the setting and the format. She'll give you everything you need to succeed. Natalia, I see you have a question that your hand is raised. I'm not sure if I remember. Lysander, are you able to?
I'm able to.
Yes.
Let me do that. There you go, Natalia. Feel free to talk.
Oh, you are muted though.
And I think
Unmute her.
Luke had a question in the Q&A afterwards.
Okay, am I able to unmute her? I don't know if that's something that,
Natalia, did you still want to talk or no? Because you raised your hand, so.
It was by accident. Thank you so much.
okay, no problem.
Okay, no worries.
No worries. Luke asks, there are many kind of entry-level jobs that require a certain number of years of coding experience. Even if we don't meet the requirements, is it still necessary for us to apply to such jobs? For example, if we revise our resumes to meet the interview requirements. A few parts to that. The first answer, and this is a term that Adele, who is also here, I think, who helped me prepare for this talk, used in talking about job requirements lists. Those are wish lists. Those are even the sections that say you must have this. Much of the time, not 100%, but I would say at least 50% of the time, you mustn't have that. When I was applying for a job at Musicnotes, I had never worked on a large scale project in the core technologies Musicnotes had done. I had done a little bit with it in college and that was it. And I was upfront about that and they still interviewed me. They still wanted me because the market right now is such that developers are in very, very high demand. I was upfront about it, but they were still very interested. And I proved that in other languages, other frameworks, I had done it. When a job is asking for a certain number of years of experience, even that I would say that is a guideline. That is not something you should take as I must have this much or I shouldn't apply. And to be honest, a lot of unless the application is asking you to commit a lot of time, there's no harm in applying, not at all. I've applied to dozens of jobs that I didn't think I was going to get. I didn't think I was going to get the job at Musicnotes, and that ended up being one of the best jobs I'd ever had. It happens. It happens more than people think. Definitely apply anyway. The one thing I will tell you though, is that when we talk about revising your resume needs to be honest. I'm sure that's not what you intended, but one could interpret revising the resume to mean putting things on there that aren't accurate. Be accurate. You can be, generous to yourself in the sense of personal projects that you worked on for a few months in college, those count. I actually, in high school and early college, I ran a website that published fan games for Star Trek. And that was a corporation that I incorporated, and I had that listed as employment, which it was because I was legally an employee, and because I did a ton of software engineering work that was really relevant and that I used in interviews. That's legitimate. But what's not legitimate is, don't pad dates or numbers or times if it's not accurate. Always be accurate, but also, think about, did you work on something cool over the summer? Make sure that's on your resume somewhere. Maybe it's not work experience in the same way, but make sure it's listed as a project that you did. Feel free to show it to people in interviews if they'd like to see it. And do not feel like the strict set of requirements that's posted. Don't feel like that's something that you must adhere to or else. Definitely not. Definitely go ahead and apply anyway. And many companies will even make it explicit. I think Olo does, for example, that they'd like you to apply even if you don't know that you meet every single qualification. That's totally okay. Any other questions from anybody? You guys have asked very good questions, by the way. I really appreciate it.
I think we have one more in the Q&A.
Yes, and I've got time, so I'm happy to be here for as many questions as there are. Is a degree a must if you even have the needed experience? It varies from company to company, but in my experience, the answer is no. I don't think I've worked for any company where if you really had all the experience, they weren't going to hire you. Normally, companies will include language like college degree or equivalent experience, which usually means, in my view, that for that period of time you were doing work in this industry of some roughly equivalent kind. I know people who have pivoted into technology from music, who pivoted into technology from customer service or quality assurance. The CTO at Musicnotes, who happens to be a good friend of mine even still, he never technically graduated from high school, and he got his first jobs in software engineering. It is absolutely not always a requirement that you have a degree, especially for more junior roles. And the further out you get from college age, the more years of experience you have, the less anybody ever looks at it. I list that I went to college, what my degree is on my resume, but it's towards the bottom. It's not the most important thing about me. It might always be on there because it's a good thing to let people know, I guess. But especially as you grow, it's not the most important thing. It is absolutely overcomable if you don't happen to have a degree. And once you get that first job, if you're able to keep it and do well, the second, third, fourth job after that, not as hard, even if you don't have a degree. Any other questions at this point? All right, I don't see.
We have one more.
Oh, one more? I see that Darren said thank you. I don't see another question though. Oh, there we go. From May, how do you become more qualified for developer jobs? Oh, that's another eternal question. Well, it can really depend. When you're working full time, it's very difficult to take lots of time out of your day to try and become more qualified. And that's a challenge, especially if the job you're in is stagnant or is not helping you. I think that what I would recommend is twofold. First, try to build up, it doesn't have to be huge, but a small repository of personal projects on topics that interest you, if you have time to do it, which not everybody does. It can be very helpful. I'll show you an example. I'll show you my personal GitHub. I've got a few repos here where I've done work. Here's an open source project where I did some small contributions. This repo is for my personal website. Here's a project that I did in C# that I released under the MIT license. It's a fairly interesting thing, but it's not that huge. This was a few weekends, maybe 20 to 30 hours of total work a couple of years ago. I've gotten a lot of dividends off of that 20 to 30 hours of practice, trying to solve a problem that I cared about, not totally solving it, to be honest with you. Like I kind of got there, but not all the way. It wasn't great. Like it works, but not as well as it could, and not as well as I'd probably do it if I tried to do it now. Qualifications are very much in the eye of the beholder. So showing that you're working on things, showing that you're learning about things can be just as good as actually already fully knowing them. And trying to make that additional time, if you can, is really helpful. The other thing is that if your current job is a technology job or has any technology aspect to it, try to lean in on that. I had an internship, I think this was I got lucky, this was between my freshman and sophomore year of college, but in that internship, I was not a technology intern. I was just doing general operations stuff. I would help people with their computers, or I would answer emails, or I would do this and that. I would do simple stuff. But I started to find technological solutions to some of these problems. For example, at one point, I wrote some Visual Basic scripts in Excel to solve some data analysis problems. At one point, I wrote a little WordPress plugin for the website for the company to help solve an issue that they were having with their contact page. I sought out those things and I said to my boss, hey, I'm doing computer science in college. I'd love to do some more technology related work. If you have something that would be valuable. That worked out really well. The great news on this, it's hard because there's only so much time in a day, but the good news is there's tons of ways that you can learn things online for yourself. I'll actually take a second to plug, by the way, that I'm doing a talk next week on C and memory management and lower level languages. And that's an area where there are not enough developers for some pretty high level and important work. So consider coming to something like that. And maybe you'll learn some things about areas where you could explore that might add to your qualifications. Anonymous asks, is there a specific interview you wish you could do all over again? And if so, what would you have done differently? Yes, there definitely are. I would actually, even though I got the job ultimately, and it was the job I wanted, I would redo one of the interviews that I did at Olo, one of the technical interviews. I felt like I did not follow my own advice in terms of I got kind of down a rabbit hole trying to code as I was talking. I didn't take a second to step back and talk about why I was stuck or the problem I was having or what I was trying to do. And I think that it made me seem worse off. It made me seem like I didn't know what I was doing because I was getting flummoxed. And I should have taken a pause, said, wait a minute, I don't think this is what I want. Let's back up for a second. Let me write out a solution before I start writing code. That would have been preferable, and I didn't do it. And I realized it at the end of the interview, and I mentioned it to the interviewees. And I kind of feel like maybe that's why I even got through that round. But of course, you don't always know. And I think there have been other situations too. Sometimes I think, oh, if I could just do that last Google interview over again, they'd make me an offer. But I don't know that. But between all 16 of you and me, I don't know that I would take that offer if it were made. So I don't really regret it. The biggest regrets I've had have definitely been about not knowing where my own priorities were versus the priorities of everybody else, and the priorities of the company. Any other questions? Don't feel bad if there aren't. We've been answering questions for a while. I see one. Any advice on how to combat imposter syndrome? Whew. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. That's kind of what I'm hoping to help you think about with this talk. The trouble is it really takes practice. I really recommend doing practice interviews with your friends if you can. Practice interviews with colleagues or professionals that you might know who might be in this in these industries. Many local technology groups, for example, here in Madison, there's a local software engineering meetup group that does stuff like that. Meetup.com is a good way to find groups that do that sort of thing if you're not in school. If you are in school, the career services outfit at your institution should definitely be able to help you arrange that. And even just doing it with friends are really good ideas. Not because it directly solves imposter syndrome. That's a very hard thing to solve. I think the majority of us struggle with it, but because it will give you so much practice that things that seem scary will stop seeming scary. They will start to seem routine. And that's kind of where you want to get to. If you've done something a million times, even if it's a hard thing, then it stops seeming quite as scary and you start to think of yourself as someone who can do it. That said, in the moment when you're in the interview and you're having those feelings, it's important to remember, and I would try to focus on, it's natural, it's normal. It doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't actually have much bearing on how the other people see you. You may think to yourself, good Lord, I'm not qualified. There's no reason they should hire me. But according to the person sitting across from you who's interviewing you, that isn't true. They wouldn't be, if you were not someone they would consider, you wouldn't be there at all. So it's absolutely okay to feel that way, but remind yourself that the mere fact you're having the conversation is actually a point in your favor. And that if you feel that way, it doesn't mean that the interviewer knows it, and it doesn't mean the interviewer will judge you for it. Generally speaking, they wouldn't. If anything, they'll probably empathize because most people, I think, go through that. Mike mentions that there's a meeting hosted by Galvanize tomorrow at 1 p.m. about imposter syndrome after failing a coding challenge. I don't know, Lysander, I can give you this URL and maybe you can, if it looks like something good for people to have, maybe you can send that out after the
Yeah, sure. I'll give that to everyone.
I'll put that in the chat for you right here.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions? One other point I want to make on imposter syndrome, by the way, real quick. All of technology, Adele pointed this out in our Discord chat, which I only just now looked at. All of technology is solving problems that haven't been solved. So feeling natural, it's natural to feel this way, in part because you really are doing something new. You know, every time you try to solve something, you're very often answering questions that haven't been answered before. It's going to take time to feel like you can do that with confidence, and that's okay. Anything else from anybody? If not, I really appreciate all the questions, you guys. I wish you all the very best of luck. Please don't hesitate to reach out over email. That's what I'm here for. If you're interested in OLO as well, but even if you're not and you just want to chat about interviewing in general, absolutely happy to help. And I wish all of you the very best of success in all of your tech endeavors. And I'm so glad if it was helpful to you. I really hope it was. And if not, you know, I'm also here to hear feedback. So if there's things you would have liked to know about that I didn't touch on, you can let Lysander know, or you can email me if that, whatever you're comfortable with, let me know, because I'm considering, you know, I may give this talk again, either here or at different venues, and I always want to be improving it. So really appreciate it, everybody. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thank you so much for spending your time here today, Max. We really appreciate it on behalf of everyone at Labs. It was a very helpful and extremely interesting talk. Not alone for me, but for everyone else, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you for being here again. Thank you to all the attendees for being here. I hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.